Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic Hypersonic.
Positronic hypersonic.
Positronic Hypersonic.
I'm Barry P. Cook, and I'm here to talk to you about the season premiere of Star Trek Starfleet Academy. It was a double episode premiere, and the first episode was called Kids These Days. And as it starts, we see the Federation arresting a pirate and a single mother who were working together and who had stolen some food to feed the mother's 6-year-old boy, Caleb. They're brought before a judge who orders the pirate sent to a pretty tough prison and the mother to a less tough prison where she'll have visitation rights with her son, Caleb, who will now become a ward of the state. The judge in question was Captain Nala Ake, who's a Lanthanite, and who attempts to comfort Caleb after his mother is taken away. What she doesn't realize is that he grabs her Starfleet insignia comm badge when she leaves the room to retrieve a toy that he left behind in a previous room. When she returns, he's escaped, using her badge to open a window, and she resigns in disgrace. 15 years later, she's a teacher on Bajor. She gets some unexpected news when she's told that Caleb, who's now 21, has been found and captured alive after having been on the run all this time. She's then offered the position of Chancellor at Starfleet Academy, which she first turns down, but upon learning of Caleb's capture, decides to take the job, seeing an opportunity to right a wrong, after which she visits him in jail, telling him that his mother is still alive and had escaped prison a year earlier before convincing him to join Starfleet Academy. She then brings him there, and we meet a mix of eccentric new characters, as well as some familiar faces. Among them, the Doctor from Star Trek Voyager. We also meet a Klingon cadet named Jaden Craig, assuming I said that correctly. Caleb wastes no time in hacking into Starfleet's communications array to try to send a message to his mother on a frequency that he thinks she'll be monitoring because of a kind of code they had between them back when he was 6. He meets a character called Genesis, who turns out to be an admiral's daughter, as well as a character named Sam, who's a member of a holographic species, though she refers to herself as a photonic being. And the ship they're on, the Athena, heads off to San Francisco, where Starfleet Academy is located. Shortly thereafter, the pirate from before, a character named Nus Braka, the Tellarite Klingon hybrid, attacks the Athena and intends to steal its warp drive. This after he heard Caleb's message and thereby figured out where the Athena was. At this point, all the cadets rally, even though there had been some conflict between them initially, personality clashes, and they are able to defeat the pirate and his crew. This didn't occur, however, without a near-death experience for the character of the Cadet Master, who is a Klingon Jem'Hadar hybrid and a very tough customer whose life ends up being saved by the cadets. The episode ends with the group arriving in San Francisco, where Caleb receives a 90-day suspension for hacking into the comms array, though he is allowed to stay at the school. The second episode was called Beta Test, and it starts with Chancellor Ake, her staff, and the cadets acclimating to their new institution. We find that Commander Jet Reno, who was in Star Trek Discovery and who is an engineer, is there as an instructor. We then see that Caleb is in her class, and we see him end up being taken to school, as it were, by Reno when he claims there's nothing that she could teach him. In fact, she does teach him that he needs to equally know his surroundings and his classmates in order to be a leader. This just before Sam, the photonic character, accidentally spills mucus on him. He then tries to leave the academy by climbing over a wall on the campus, but stops when he runs into a mysterious woman who seems to sense what he is thinking. She tells him she thinks he's conflicted, and when he questions why she thinks that, she says it's because he literally is sitting on a fence, which he was. They share a smile and a laugh, but she ends up leaving without giving Caleb her name. It isn't long, though, before he runs into her again, at which point we find out that her name is Lyra, and she's part of a youth delegation from Beta Z, of which her father is the president. Having taken a liking to Caleb, Lyra asks to be taken on a tour of the facility led by him. He takes her to stellar cartography, where he shows her how he's trying to locate his mother's planet but can't find it. At which point, she gives Starfleet's computer access to Beta Z star charts, after which he is in fact able to find this planet. At one point, he asks her what she was doing down by the beach, and she explains that she had hoped to see some humpback whales. And then later, when they're walking around the campus, he takes her to a large room which turns out to be a viewing area for, you guessed it, a humpback whale, which she obviously finds very romantic, and which almost leads to them kissing, but her father walks in on them, and the kiss is prevented before he walks out with his daughter a little bit upset. It turns out that the Federation is desperately trying to get Betazoid to rejoin the Federation, and they are eventually convinced to do this when they're told that Starfleet headquarters, which they were planning on establishing yet again in Paris where it had always been, will now be established on Betazed. Caleb then returns to his quarters where he finds that in addition to his original roommate, with whom he has sort of a personality conflict, he now also has a third roommate in the form of Lyra's brother. And when he asks her brother where Lyra is, he explains that she decided to spend her time as a delegate with the War College, which is sort of a companion academy to Starfleet Academy that's also a Starfleet institution. But she has, it seems, given her brother a gift to give Caleb in the form of a bracelet. Second episode ends with the Chancellor telling Caleb that a message addressed to Caleb's mother has been intercepted, and that even though it's a 3-month-old message, there's a real possibility that this will be able to help them find her, which Ake had previously pledged to help Caleb do. So I mentioned in my reaction video to the trailer for this show that they've been trying to do a Starfleet Academy live-action thing for a very long time, since the late 80s or early 90s. At first, they wanted to do a feature-length film about it in place of Star Trek V. That didn't happen. We all know that they then introduced some very young officers on Star Trek The Next Generation that were in several of the latter seasons. Whether that was supposed to end up being a spin-off show or not, I don't remember, but they certainly dabbled with the whole cadets/young officers thing. There, they also had Starfleet Academy novels and/or a comic book. There was a Starfleet Academy video game. They then, of course, did the cartoon Lower Deck, which featured young officers. And even Prodigy was about some kids joining up with Starfleet and trying to make officers of themselves. So it's something they've been trying to do for a long time, meaning that I wasn't surprised when they announced that they were going to do this show, but I was concerned that it was going to be really bad, largely because of the marketing, which made it look like an overly young adult drama, an overly young adult focused drama that wouldn't really lend itself to being a Star Trek show. And don't get me wrong, I'm a fan of young adult things. I'm a huge fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I liked the Nancy Drew show on the CW, although the latter seasons weren't as good as the first couple. I liked Riverdale, which, again, wasn't as good in the latter seasons as it was in the first couple. I was a big fan of all the shows in the Arrowverse, which, of course, were about adults, but, there again, it was very CW-esque. I was a fan of Stranger Things, again, in the first few seasons more so than in the latter seasons. And, the Sabrina show on Netflix. You guessed it, earlier seasons better than the latter few, but I was still a fan. But I just didn't think it would mesh well with Star Trek because the characters are supposed to be professionals in a paramilitary type organization, an organization with a hierarchy where, you follow orders and you behave as a professional. So I didn't think it would mesh well with Star Trek. I was also dubious because this show is a direct follow-up to Discovery, which picks up right where Discovery left off in the 32nd century. And Discovery was horrible. But I'm happy to report that I really liked these 2 episodes. I think they did a great job crafting these characters. The Photonic character seems very interesting, and the young lady that plays her is great. I like the Caleb character. He's a bit of a Michael Burnham. He's a bit of a Bestest Evar type character, though I loathe quoting Doomcock. But not as much as Michael was. I think they got the balance more right with him than they did with her, because he obviously has flaws and he knows he has flaws. And though he is kind of cocky, at the same time, he does seem to have some humility. So I don't think it's as egregious in the case of this character as it was with Michael when they made her this never wrong, almost Jesus-like character. I really like the Lyra character. I think she's fantastic, though I'm glad she's not in Starfleet because I think it would have been cringy to see 2 Starfleet characters going through that teen angst stuff together. One's bad enough. And like I say, I think they crafted his character well, so I'm not terribly concerned that he's going to be overly emotional like all the adult characters were on Discovery. But I think there is going to be some of that on behalf of both characters, and having only one of them in Starfleet is better than having them both in Starfleet, which is not to say that romance hasn't been done well in Star Trek with officer characters. But, these are not the next-gen writers. So I was concerned, but I'm glad, like I say, that she's not in Starfleet because I think that'll take some of the ick out of it. Having Robert Ricardo back as the Doctor is awesome. I didn't realize he was going to be the Doctor. I thought he was going to be a later version of the same program. Because remember, that program was used Starfleet wide during the time of Voyager. So I thought it was just a program that was still in use and that this was the Starfleet Academy version. I didn't think it was the Voyager version that had now found his way to being a teacher at Starfleet Academy. So I'm thrilled that it's the same exact character. I was thrilled enough that he was going to be playing a version of the character, the emergency medical hologram, but that he's playing the actual one from Voyager is just awesome. So I'm happy about that. I really like Holly Hunter as an actress, and I think they did a great job casting her as this character that's obviously a bit unorthodox because she's great at playing characters like that. And so I'm liking that character quite a bit. Jet Reno is an awesome character, so I'm glad she was there. And I thought they just did a great job with the story. Most of the story points made sense. There wasn't a lot of dumb in the story. I thought that the stories were engaging and well executed, especially in the second episode. I really liked the callback to the humpback whales and how they not only did a callback, but then it became a really powerful moment when he brings her to see them. I just thought that was very well done, and it shows me that the writers are trying to write good stories. And they've obviously learned the lesson from Discovery about how episodic television is better than serialized television. Obviously, there are serialized elements to this show, but it's episodic. There's a different encapsulated story episode to episode. So that's working for me. Paul Giamatti is excellent, of course. So that's great. We're going to see more of him, obviously. So, based on these 2 episodes, I'm really looking forward to the rest of the season. Now, this isn't to say that there aren't some things that made me go, huh? Captain Ake just goes overnight from being absent from Starfleet for 15 years to being the Chancellor of Starfleet Academy. They don't show her getting any kind of a primer on new technologies that Starfleet's using that maybe the rest of the galaxy doesn't know about. They don't show her sort of boning up on Starfleet protocol or any of that stuff. She just goes from kind of being a teacher on Bajor 15 years running right back into Starfleet captain mode without any sort of acclamation or reacclamation. And that didn't make a whole lot of sense. But, that's a momentary thing. We're past it. And now it's time to see what stories they tell. I have concerns about this War College thing. Starfleet is a peaceful organization. It's an exploratory organization. So this idea that it would have a war college kind of doesn't sit right with me off the bat. So we'll have to see where they go with that. I mean, I suppose they've always had officers in the fleet who were more soldiers than explorers, but I don't know. I'll have to see what they do with it. If it, seems to fit in with the Starfleet ethos or if it seems to be contrary to it. But that remains to be seen. So far, they haven't done anything with that strikes me as bad. Something else that I didn't like is the Cadet Master character played by an actress that I really like, who I immediately liked when I first saw her playing the fugitive doctor on Doctor Who. And it isn't so much that I don't like, what the character is in terms of a hard-nosed drill sergeant type character. I think that's a character that fits in well in the Starfleet Academy environment. But first of all, she's a Klingon Jem'Hadar hybrid, which is just weird. And it's like, why did they do that? Why? It just seems bizarre. I mean, and that's overlooking the fact that she's a female Jem'Hadar, which shouldn't exist, or which, in prior canon was established not to exist. So I'm looking past that. It's just bizarre. Why would you do that? And then at the same time, like the main recurring villain is also not only a hybrid, but a Klingon hybrid with Tellarite. Like, what is it with the Klingon hybrids on this show? It's a little strange. But anyway, back to her. She speaks with a really thick, middle to lower class British accent. So not the Jean-Luc Picard British accent. And where the hell is that from? She's Klingon and Jem'Hadar. Where the hell is that from? Why didn't they require her to do a different accent? Like American or at least upper class British a la Captain Picard. It doesn't make sense that she's got this, "Whoa, you better get right with the program, cadet, because I'm your cadet master." Like, why does she speak like a British rogue character from like a pub in 20th century London? It just doesn't make sense. "Oi, cadet, what you think you're doing?" That kind of thing. Like, what? That doesn't make any sense at all. So that annoys the crap out of me. There were a smattering of sort of canon breaking things that they did in this episode that, if you look hard enough, don't make sense. But like I said, because I thought the characters that were focused on were so well done and that the two stories were quite good, in this case, I'm willing to look past that stuff. Whereas on Discovery, the stories were so bad every week that there wasn't any reason for me to give them a pass on that stuff. Anyway, bottom line is, I really like these two episodes, and I think the series is off to a good start, and I'm looking forward to the coming episodes, which of course I will do breakdown and review videos for once they're released. For now, I'm going to get out of here, but I'll be back with another video soon. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.